Those of you that don't know me, my 10-second introduction is I was in Brave a long time ago. I did a whole bunch of Alliance bomber fleet FCing for many months, left, came back a couple times, and I'm in another corp now, but they asked me to do a guest lecture, so here I am. And that's my introduction, so I'll just jump right into it. This shouldn't take more than a half hour. Is someone recording? I know Rortech wanted...
Yep, it's recording.
Yep, okay, cool. So I'll just go down the points here, and I'll... if you have a question at some point, then just speak up, or you can ask it at the end. So, okay, so my first point, when to use bombers. So bombers are, if nothing else, situational. They are, of course, very weak. You can't tank a bomber, but in very specific circumstances, most of which you'll probably never do, because it's very... the only times you'll ever tank a bomber is if you're hard countering a battleship doctrine or some shit, and nobody even does that anymore. So bombers, of course, they just rely off of surprise and alpha, whether they're using void or damage bombs. And so the main times that you'll use oh fuck. Lol. Hang on a second, I'm dying. So how was I uncloaked? Oh, he must have warped to me. Fudge nuggets. Who is that someone in here?
What's Zedinsky?
Zedinsky?
He's up above, I think.
Hang on, I'm ransoming myself 1 moment. Oh my god. Oh, okay. I'll just keep on lecturing and hope I don't die. If I do, then rip. Okay. So
has he deaggressed?
No, he hasn't. It would be quite nice if he would let me go. He says herpaderpa, my apologies, so maybe that means he's cycling down. There we go, I'm good now.
There we go.
Okay. Well, that was weird. Okay. Sorry about that. Anyways, I will be bouncing now so that doesn't happen again. Okay, scenarios that you can use bombers. Okay, the best scenarios to use these are in station defense and stratops. And of course, this being when there's fleets poking around outside station and you don't quite have the numbers for just a solid normal fleet to engage them, so you would want to use bombers as force multipliers. You can almost never use bombers by themselves. You almost always use them as a force multiplier with another fleet. The only exceptions to that rule is if there's something really, really susceptible to bombers, such as attack battle cruisers or microwarp driving T1 cruisers. And getting onto that point, your priority of targets, as in the things that you want to engage when you're fighting with bombers. And the absolute best thing to engage would be attack battle cruisers like Oracles, Taloses, that sort of thing, because they have the best ratio of SIG to tank. Yeah. Also, they're not that fast, they're easier to hit. And then second to that would be Microwarp driving T1 cruisers, and then after that would be T1 battleships, I guess. And then you can do a reasonable amount of damage to microwarp driving T2 cruisers, but as far as T3 cruisers go, you're not going to do that much. That being said, that's with void bomb, or that's with damage bombs. I'm sorry. With void bombs, you can still do a whole lot of damage to a T3 cruiser fleet, but I'll get to that. Does everyone understand the basic premise of how bombs work? As in, they go for a certain distance, they explode with a radius and do things. Everyone get that? Yep. Okay, good. Just want to make sure I'm not leaving anybody in the dark here. Okay, yeah, to not use certain types of bombers would, like I said, definitely don't use damage bombs against T-30s. Don't use... you can kind of use damage bombs against faction battleship hulls, but you're going to want at least 2 squads to do something worthwhile. For those kind of things, if you can't really harm it with damage bombs, then your best bet is to go with void bombs and try and fuck up their logi or fuck up their cap if they're trying to do a microwarp drive doctrine. Yeah, so that's when to and when to not use bombers. Of course, you'll have to just adapt to each situation, but that's your normal go-to. Okay, so moving on. Bomber mechanics. So when bombing with damage bombs, as opposed to void bombs or focus void bombs, you can only have 8 bombers in each squad. That being that if you have multiple squads of bombers, you can't warp 10 of them from one direction onto a target and all fire at once, because the last 2 bombs damage will be negated. The reason for that is if you look at a bomb and you look at its attributes, you'll see that it has, what is it? It's like a 98% resist or 99% resist to its own damage type. And then it has a certain amount of HP. So what this boils down to is, I'm trying to find a very easy way to explain this. If you set off a certain amount of bombs of the same type next to each other, that number being 8, they will all explode and do their damage. If you, however, add on a 9th one, then that 9th one will get blown up by all the other bombs before it and won't do anything. And same thing if you add on more bombs after that. Now, this same principle applies to void bombs, however, at a much slower pace. That being that you can set off something like 40 void bombs from the same direction, and they'll all still work. Okay, so that's basically how that works. Did I lose anyone there? Good. Oh, awesome. Speak over me if someone has a question here. Okay, so all right, another little mechanical aspect. I'm assuming that all of you know how cloaks work and how all that junk and drag bubbles and that sort of thing. Basically, at least. So, when you are grouping your bombers up and you need them all to warp to you, there are some scenarios when you can warp them at 0 to you and some scenarios to warp them at range. Keep in mind, as long as they're cloaked, they can warp at 0 to you. But the thing is, if one of them goofs, which they will, oftentimes, if they goof, then they'll decloak and they'll decloak the entire fleet because everybody's bunched up on you at 0. So oftentimes, it's a good practice to have if your fleet members warp to you at 10 or 20, provided that you're just grouping your people together. This gives you the least chance of having everyone get decloaked at once. Okay.
What about warping at 0 and then scattering from there?
That's it. Thank you for saying that. That's a really good practice to do. Whenever you have your fleet members warp to you at 0, to minimize the risk of what I just said happening, do exactly what Apollo just said. As soon as they land, you tell them to starburst out from you and just float for about 10 seconds and then stop their ship. But be sure to remind them a couple of times to stop their ship, because what will happen is some couple of dummies will burn their ships for like 300 kilometers before realizing that they goofed up. Or they won't realize it at all until you hit warp and you're going in to bomb something, and then their angle is all off and it goofs things up. Good question. Anything else?
Nope.
Okay. All right. Okay, so that's all I'm gonna need to cover for basic mechanics. If one of you has a question about mechanics, you can ask it at the end. Okay, so tax. Let me get my link here. So any Bomber FC is going to have an ample amount of tax, which an ample being a lot. Because without tax, then you're forced to rely on warping from Celestials and using combat probes purely, which you're going to use combat probes anyways, but if you don't have tax, then you don't have eyes. So you must have tax. So if you look at that Imgur link I put in Fleet Chat, then you'll see how I usually run my tax. If you look at image 3 and 4, I think, you'll see like I have a picture of my people and places tab, and you see how it's laid out. such as I have the system name and then the celestial and then the position of that tax relative to that celestial. And so I was really systematic about my tax. I guess you don't have to be quite as systematic about yours, but it's really helpful to be, because this keeps it very well organized, and then you can just have your people in places up. You don't have to right click in space. You can just keep your people in places up, and you can just see, okay, so I sent one squad to the back tactical. Okay, so I send this one to the front tactical, and it's all nice like that. One extra little note about that is that I made all mine at 200 because this is back before the grids were expanded to 20,000 kilometers, and they were 250 kilometers. And so if you had them farther than 200, then you had a good chance of not being able to see your target. But so you can make your attacks, I would recommend making them at least 300, because that gives you a lot more room for error. In case they're more than 50 kilometers off of the celestial, then it gives you a lot more flexibility in being able to warp your bombers in. Does that make sense to everyone? The way I run these tacks and all that junk? The way I make them?
So with those spirals, what range are those at?
Those, I put those really tight. I put those about, I think it was a 50-kilometer orbit. That particular one that you'll see, it's picture 5 or something. It looks like several blue halos around that gate. That would be the one and only Ahoda Madden making tacks for me, and he's a special one. I said make a few tacks around the gate. He made 660 something. Yep, 665.
So for those, you just set your ship to auto
Yeah,
orbit
just
and just drop tacks.
orbit. Yeah, like you don't need but a fraction of that many, but I just make a sort of a spiral, kind of like Mucky you did here. Just boat around. And the reason for these is so that I can have even more dynamic ability to warp in at different spots and at different ranges to certain things. It just gives me more flexibility. The more flexibility you have, the better chances you have of landing a good hit on your opponents. Any questions? Cool. Okay. Moving on. I think the only other pictures I had in here were of me and my Ares showing how I made the tacks. Like, to get them straight, I just open up the directional thingamabobber with Control D and fly along one of the sets of numbers to get them straight. This helps me be even more meticulous about my bombing runs. I was always really particular about it. As far as where to make tacks, start off with the most important systems, staging system, and then major strat-op systems, and then kind of work on less major systems and that sort of thing. Yep. It would even be worth it to keep an alt around when you're doing fleets to make tacks for you, but I'll get to that. Okay, so that was celestial attacks, but warp-ins regarding bubbles on the fly. So this is when you're in a fleet and you're fighting, and there's of course going to be bubbles everywhere, and you need to make a warp-in, as in let's say there's a bubble directly on the gate, and you can't warp your fleet members directly to the thingies that are at 0 on the gate, because they'll all hit the bubble and get dragged, and your range will be messed up, and you'll probably get decloaked by something. You'll all die. It'll be bad. So what you do is let's see, assuming you have combat probes, which you should, you find something that's outside of the bubble, or a wreck, or something that you can warp to in such a way that you land outside of the bubble. I'm assuming you all know the basic bubble mechanics, in that if you warp in a direction of a bubble, you'll get dragged by it, but if you warp to the side of it a little bit, you won't get dragged. So it's sort of like aiming for not the bubble, and if you don't hit the bubble in any part of your trajectory, then you won't get dragged. And so then you bookmark that, and then you use that as a place to warp your fleet members to, and making sure, of course, that they don't get dragged. So it gets tricky when you involve bubbles, but that's what makes it fun. Does everyone comprehend what that means? What I just said? Frenchies, am I talking too fast for you?
No,
No, it's okay.
Let's go.
Swiggity. Okay. I'm not trying to. That wasn't supposed to be sarcastic. I actually don't want to talk too fast and stumble over myself.
It's okay, it's okay.
All right. Good. Okay. So moving on. So number 4 is how to move your fleet. So of course, bombers have covert cloaks which help, but they can still definitely be caught when they're moving, you know, if there's bubble camps or whatever. So the very best way to move your fleet is for you to be a good FC and have covert Cyno in system and have a Blops bridge. Yeah, exactly. So of course, like, this is Brave, so you don't have that many Black Ops pilots just laying around. You know, I get it, but make an effort to make yourself a little watch list of Black Ops pilots and try and coordinate with them and say, hey, can you be on for this strat op and bridge my guys? And, you know, just something like that. Okay, so if you do that, then it's really easy. So then you just take the Cyno to the system, and then have the Blops back home or at the nearest midpoint that you can to the target system. Aquarius is pretty nice for jumping around, isn't it? It's pretty, it's okay, I guess. It's fairly centralized. But yeah, and then you just light Cyno and jump them in. That's the easiest way. But assuming you can't do that, which most of the time you won't, I figure, be sure to instruct your fleet members on how to stay safe. You know, have them relay information to each other about where bubbles are and camps. If you're flying hybrid bombers, stress to them that it's probably a bad idea to engage little stuff on the way, because they'll die because they're bombers and they're not that tanky. Use an alt of yours or scout them yourself in your T3 if you're being good and you're flying a T3. I'll explain that in a second. Yeah, just try and be as careful as you can when moving, because the most embarrassing thing is when you lose bombers before the op even gets started. A good practice is to try and fly right behind the main body fleet, like the ANI fleet is there as they're moving. Just get your fleet members to follow them so they can kind of act as a snowplow. Okay, yeah, that's all that. So moving on. Fittings is the fun stuff. I've always been a guru for fittings. Always loved them. Let me link you some stuff. So the minimum that you need to FC bombers, of course, is a bomber or a Covops. As far as the choice between those two goes, I always preferred the Covops. So here is, yeah, this is my fit. In Fleet Chat, that's the Helios that I used to use all the time for FCing. And assuming you don't want to use a Helios, the only reason you wouldn't use a Helios and you would rather use a bomber is if you really wanted to whore and there's not that much at stake. The Helios is a lot safer because it's faster, has a smaller recloaking delay, has better scan strength. It's just all over better than a bomber for FCing purposes. Because if you're FCing, then you usually shouldn't be warping in with your squad unless you have a super shortage of bombers, or you just, it's not an important fleet and you just want to whore. So Helios, but then here is, let's see, Strato Bomber. That is the Nemesis I used to use. Liquid Ozone for the Covert Cyno. Yeah, with that Helios, I would take a Mobile Depot and a Covert Cyno because it only has 2 high slots. So whenever I'd Cyno in my fleet, I'd Mobile Depot out and refit the probe launcher to a Cyno them in, and refit back to the probes. Yep. That's the Helios kind of lacks in that way because you have to do all that junk. But yep, that's why you have that. Thank you for the question.
Can you use an Anadoma or another covert ops with 3 high slots instead?
Yeah, sure. I could only fly the Galente one at this time, so I used the Galente. I'm just throwing examples out there. Now, if you're not a scrub like I was, then you'll use one of these 2 fits. Here we are. So here's a Proteus and a Legion. That Legion was the exact fit that Bosun Dubstep. He's used to do all kinds of bomber FCing things. I think he talked with you guys for a class or something, didn't he? Something like that.
Yep.
Yep. So that's his feat. That's his fit. That Legion. It's a really good fit. The reason you would want to use one of these is because it's internally, it's cloaky, it has defenses, has a Cyno, it has everything you want, right? So there's those hits for your consideration, and you're not gonna lose them much. Like they're hard to lose. This internally T3 allows you to not be too scared of drag bubbles when you're warping around trying to get warp ins for your fleet. Makes a lot higher chance of success to not die. On the note of not dying though, if you have an alt, use it and take a backup FC ship with you into the system in case you die in your main, and then you can swap out to that secondary ship. You can keep on FCing. Because, you know, it's not too unlikely that you'll get dragged by a bubble. Okay,
How important are the Tech 2 rigs on the Legion fit?
I gotta understand, Bosun is stupid rich, but Tech 2 rigs are cheap. Those are super cheap. That's like 9 mil. The thing that's expensive with that Legion fit is those are the highest tier hyperspace. Sorry about that. The most expensive thing about that fit is the hyperspatials. They're the highest tier ones, are like 300 mil a piece or something stupid.
Right. How important is that?
Not important.
All right.
Like
Cool.
met it down once or twice, and it'll cut the price hugely. Like it doesn't. It changes it from like a 6 something. It changes like. Jesus Christ! Shut up, people. It takes down just a tiny amount of warp speed. It's not worth it in my opinion. If you're stupid rich, go for it, but I'm not, so I don't.
I'm not either. That's why I was like,
Yeah.
I looked at. I was gonna fit that up the other day, and I thought,
Yeah, that it kind of puzzled me when I first looked at the fit. I was like, what is so expensive? But it's the hyperspatial. So it drops down to a standard like 600 mil or something like
oh,
that.
okay.
Yeah,
Better. Okay.
it's pretty reasonable.
Yeah, I was just, anyways, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so another thing in fleet bombing, be sure to instruct your fleet members on how to use their fits. Like, they'll have like their ECM burst and all that junk. Be sure to remind them on an oply basis, as in by each op, how to use that, like when to use that, what to overheat, all that junk. What I would always tell them is use your ECM burst if you ever find yourself decloaked and within 10k of something bad. Just hit that while you're trying to warp out, and it might save your life. Yeah, just stress important things because they will forget a lot. So things that are important, stress them. Damage bombing. So covering this, and then after this I'll cover void bombing. So damage bombing. In using your attacks, presuming you have 2 squads or more, right? You have 2 options. You can do multi-direction bombing and launch both squads at the same time. This will of course give the most alpha, but it's a lot harder to put together, and it's a lot riskier. Or you can just go from a single direction and do 1 squad, and then a few seconds later do the other squad. To do the multi-directional, you just have to use the text like I demonstrated before. See how it was front, back, left, right? And by the way, that's in accordance to the sun, by the way. Like the sun is always front. But what you do is if you had 4 squads, you'd warp 1 squad front, 1 squad back, etc. until you had them in 90-degree angles, and then you warp them on the target at center, presuming there's no nasty drag bubbles, and then you warp them at a certain range so that the different squads' bombs won't conflict with each other, and then this makes a little kill zone in the center. That's a really hard thing to put together, and the moment usually isn't opportune. So in practice, you'll most oftentimes be doing single directional bombing, which is you'll just warp all your squads to, say, the front tack, and then you warp your squads one at a time in fairly rapid succession, just as fast as you can, without having danger of the different squads' bombs interfering with each other. So it's like 8 seconds, I think, between each wave, or 9 seconds is the safe thing to do. And 1 wave after another, and then you reload, and then you go again. While I'm thinking about it though, bomb trucks. Bomb trucks are an important thing. If you don't have an alt that can do it yourself, then have somebody ask a fleet member to bring a bomb truck, just a blockade runner, and load it up with whatever bomb type you're using.
Blockade runners can take Covert up Cynos, can't they?
Yep, and they can also travel. If you don't have a Black Ops, then they can travel pretty easily in nullsec. A little bit easier than a bomber actually. They're faster.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so that's multi and single directional bombing. And so moving on to void bombing. So void is a little bit different because you never need to do multi-directional bombing with void because you can launch like 40 bombs together at once. So thing is though, most ships aren't going to have that big of a capacitor. Like each bomb drains 1500 gigajoules, so you don't need to launch 20 bombs at once. You should almost always, with void bombing, split them up into little groups or even solo, and just try to void bomb at as often intervals as possible. Now you can, of course, fuck up a guardian chain, even nude out caps, but another really good use is if there's microwarp driving cruisers, especially if they rely on cap boosters, then you can run them out of cap boosters really quick if you keep up the constant yet small void bombing pressure. If you just make it constant and just keep on nuding them little by little, then they'll run out of cap boosters real quick, and then they'll be a lot easier for the main fleet to take out. It's pretty hard to mess with the guardian cap chain though. You can do it, but you just need some pretty good coordination to do it. Yep. And my final notes are to again stress the little important things, because people forget these things all the time. All of the important things people will forget, such as being bomb types, where they should be when they should be there, remembering that like they can't see each other and you can't see them, so you just have to be very systematic in your, okay, so I told my fleet members to warp here, and so they're still there, and these guys are over there, and just keeping track of your fleet members, and stressing that they stay cloaked when they're supposed to be cloaked. Like you'll end up repeating a lot of stuff because they're not F1 monkeys. They're not the normal F1 monkeys of nullsec. Like they have to do a lot of stuff themselves. So keep that in mind. Okay, so that's all my lecture notes. So does anyone have any questions before a quick little practical?
One question, dealing with Ishtars and bombs against drones.
Oh yeah, this is a good one. Okay, so Ishtars are really susceptible, or that being any sentry drone doctrine, but Ishtars are of course very common in nullsec. I'm assuming that Goonies are using them against you guys?
No comment.
No? God damn it, phones. Okay. So, assuming that something goons are using Ishtars, or anyone's using Ishtars against you, one squad of bombers can take out sentry drones. So what they'll do is they'll, of course, drop their sentry drones in one little huddle, and then, or even try to spread them out some. But if you take a squad of bombers, then you can just wreck their drones. And they can only take, memory serves correctly, it's 3 flights of drones, 3 flights of sentries that Ishtars take with them. And if they know that you have bombers with you, what they'll do is they'll try and starburst out and spread their drones out as much as they can, but they can only do so much, because the more decentralized their drones are, the harder time the FC has of applying full damage. So yeah, that's a really good use of bombers, is against Ishtars as a hard counter.
Thank you.
How do you
Anything
deal
else?
with warp outs for the fleet?
Okay, that's a good question. I did several different ways of doing that. Of course, the easiest but the worst way to do it is just try to find a celestial that's kind of in line with where you're bombing and what direction you're bombing, and just get them to warp out to that celestial, or warp them out yourself. What you can do is like warp a squad. You'll be flag distant from fleet warp, of course, and you'll just be sitting at a perch, and so you'll warp the squad from, like, say, the front tactical to bomb, and then they'll drop their bombs, and then the moment you see all the bombs are in the air, then you warp the same squad to a warp out. And the best way to do this is have some tactical on the same grid that's in the direction that they are bombing a good ways off, and just have them align before they launch the bombs, so that all they have to do is decloak, launch bombs, and then either warp themselves to your warp out tactical, or you warp the whole squad to the warp out tactical. And then one thing I did, and it worked out quite a bit of success, is I would do that, and I'd warp them to the warp out tactical, and then I'd have a perch like 500 kilometers away that I'd warp all the squads to after that, and then reset, so I never actually had to leave grid. Usually you'll have to like get them to warp out to a celestial, and then warp back to you, and then you're bouncing around the whole system. But you can save a lot of time if you have enough tacks on grid, and that just comes back to the importance of having as many systematically good tacks as you can. You know, the more tacks you have, the more options you have. Did that answer your question?
Yep.
Cool.
I mean,
What
I'm
else?
guessing that changes a bit with the bigger grids now.
Yeah, I guess it kind of. But
Presumably, when they're warping out, they can't recloak immediately, so you want
Oh,
to
yeah,
get
they
them
can.
off grid. Yeah,
I mean they can.
cloaking redeploy.
Well,
is
well,
slow,
yeah. There's
so-
the cloaking. They're gonna have to wait at least until they're in warp. They'll be in warp before they can cloak back up. Definitely. You don't want to keep them. You don't want them to be on grid for, you know, any more than about 5 seconds or 6 seconds. You really don't. Of course, you'll have to have them on grid for some amount of time, but just as little time as possible. On grid being, of course, within range of their anti-bomber support and decloaked. So you can still warp them to 300 kilometers away. What are they going to do? You warped them 300 kilometers away, and then they can just cloak back up and then get to their new perch. So you don't have to get it that far. That practice still works. It's just slightly different, I guess. Just have to be a little bit more careful.
What about warping in an interdictor first? So you would so I scan down the fleet. You warp in an interdictor at 0, they bubble, and then you warp in your guys.
What you're suggesting is a really good tactic. That's I only did it like once or twice because it was just never that opportune. But what you can do, right, is you'll have
I guess my question was, how do you get your guys out? Like, once they hit, they're going to land on the bubble, right?
I'm explaining that. Hang on.
All right, cool.
So it's fine. So what you'll do is you'll have your fleet set up in your perch, say the front perch, and you're 300k off the target, and say they're on the gate, right? And so what you'll do is you will have your dictor cloaked up a couple hundred kilometers away, or even a close celestial. And this should be a combat probe fit dictor. The only one that really works really well is the flycatcher because it's got so much CPU. But I think you can use most of them I think you can fit probes on there somehow along with a bubble. But what you do is you warp your dictor to the middle of their fleet. At the same instant, while the dictor is in warp, you hit the warp button for your fleet members to warp at the bombing range to the target. And then, since you did that, your dictor will land either at the same time or a little bit before or a little bit after your bombers. But that doesn't matter because before you threw up the bubble, your bombers hit the warp button, so they won't get dragged. So as soon as the dictor lands, bubble goes up. A couple seconds later, 3 seconds later or so, the bombers will land and they won't get dragged. And then they can drop their bombs and warp out. That's how you do that.
All right, cool.
If you want to be really cool, you can also use bait if they're on a gate, then you can use bait to get them aggressed, like a bait Nereus or something, and then use the dictor and the bombers, and they've got nowhere to go because they're bubbled and aggressed, and what do you do? So it's a pretty sexy thing to do. Something else.
Stupid question maybe, but is it ever worth it having like a cloaked up covert ops as a sort of mobile tech?
Oh no, that's not a stupid question at all. That's a cloaked co-ops or a cloaked T3 or something to use as warp-ins is a really good practice. You can use this as an alt, or I used to have one of the younger FCs would help me out by providing mobile weapons just like that. Like I'd say, so his name was Mitnick, and I'd say, Mitnick, try and get a weapon on the north side of those guys, 30k off that block or whatever, and he'd be trying to get that while I was doing another kind of bombing run, waiting for him to get that tack. And if he got it, then great, I used it, and if he didn't, then it's whatever, I was still bombing. So yeah, it's definitely a very good practice to have an alt or a fleet member that you can trust. The thing is, though, just be careful who you trust, because there's, of course, a lot of spies in Brave, even now, you know. There's plenty of spies, and if you do something that someone that you don't know at all, then there's a decent chance that they'll just, oops, I made a mistake, FC, and they're AWOXing you on purpose, but you don't know that. So be careful who you choose to be your assistant, because you never know who's a spy. Good question. That was all right. Anything else? Don't at me.
Maybe just real quick, you said that taking bombs against T3s is at least damage bombs most of the time isn't worth it. But like even if you have just a standard fleet operation, and I'll just say maybe we're like assisting an armed fleet or something, and they have a normal DPS fleet on grid, even at that point, is it not worth it taking those damage bombs with you?
The thing is, see, I'll give it a sometimes, but usually it would be more effective to use Void in that scenario, because T3s are so tanky and have such a small sig. You're not gonna apply that much damage. You'd have to have a big wing of bombers to really hurt them. So it's not useless, it's just less effective most of the time than Void bombs. And of course, I mean, like, you'll just have to figure out in your own experience, you know, is this worth it or is it not? And then you can come to your own conclusions, and you'll know when to use what. Like the most important thing about bombers is experience. Like, you just get a feel for when you should do this or when you shouldn't engage, and a lot of it just comes with experience. But yeah, good question. What else? All right. Well, if anyone thinks of another question, then speak up about it whenever you think of it. But other than that, I'm just gonna, and we'll go ahead and do a quick demonstration just to kind of show you what the idea is for a multi-directional and kind of how that works. So let's see. I've got Wing Command. Who's boss? Can I have boss? Mucky? Can I have boss?
Yep.
Thank you. No one else is gonna join the fleet, so it's fine. Okay, so first things first, I'm assuming that everyone in fleet is in something with a co-ops cloak. That's all I need. I'm just gonna assume that. There we go. Okay, everybody undock, please, from station. There's no bubbles on station, I presume, right? I'm gonna assume that. Everybody undock from station.
Yeah,
and then once you get your members undocked, then you'll either, I mean, if the station's under fire or something, then of course you'll have to be careful getting them out. But if there's nothing, then what you'll do is, so everybody warp to attack or safe and cloak up. Everybody get either just burn off station and cloak up, or warp to attack, or warp to a safe, something, and then cloak up. And then once you're cloaked up, put a C in fleet. Of course, this is optional. This is just my taste. I like being able to visually see who in my okay, Miyosho, you're not undocked. Okay, that's fine. I like to be able to visually see who's cloaked, who's warped to me. I like to be able to see that. It gives me a sense of where my fleet members are, because otherwise I just have to assume that people are doing what I said, and I made perfect sense, which I don't. I make mistakes all the time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So there we go. We should be just fine. Okay, so now everyone at this point, once you've got everybody in the same system as you and they're all cloaked up and you're at where you want them to be in a moment. Hubert, you're not covert. Okay, well, that's okay, but you won't partake in this, I guess. That's fine. So everyone at this point, warp to me, and there's those W's in the fleet, and then so warp to me at 0. Warp to me at 0. And so with this,
Only if you have a cloak on.
Warp drive
Yeah.
active.
Staying cloaked. The point of me getting everyone to cloak up was so that we don't have any incidents of people getting in warp together, decloaked, and then they don't cloak up, and then, cancer ensues. So everyone please warp to me at 0, and then put an L in fleet once you land. And then once you land, just starburst out a few kilometers. Keep in mind what I'm walking you through right now is just the basic run through of if there's a thing on the Celestial and you're going to bomb it. All right, that's everybody, I think. Cool. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, everybody look at your fleet window and look at my fleet and watch. See, I'm in wing command right now. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave squad 1 right here. I'm going to take squad 2. Keep in mind that both squads are in the same position right now. We're both at the same position. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take squad 2 and let me flag myself except for fleet warp. That's an important thing. Be sure to remember when you are and when you aren't flag exempt. Magnet cloak up, please. Oh, wait. Oh, yeah. Never mind. You told me. Never mind. You're good. Okay. And so what I'm doing right now is I just warped
Warp
squad
drive
2
active.
to the opposite tactical. So as soon as they land, then they'll be on an opposite side of the grid. And squad 2, JFK, confirm you got a warp?
Yep.
All right, cool. So they landed just about now. And so what I'm doing myself is I'm warping to a tack in the middle. So hang on just a second and I'll show you. So now that my bombers are cloaked up and everything, I wouldn't use this tack. Look on grid and see here I am. I'm kind of in between you two. I would have a tack above the gate because I usually don't warp my bombers to above, and I just use that spot for me. Just make sure your perch is far enough off of the gate so that you can warp your fleet members. Because if you're too close to warp yourself to the Celestial, then you can't warp your fleet members. Okay, so then what I would do at this point is assuming that they're at 0 on the gate, then I redirect your attention back to the fleet, my fleet window. I put myself back in wing command so that next time I give a wing warp, then it affects both squads. And I right click the gate or my combat probe scanner window. And one thing, if you're using combat probes, then be sure to refresh your scan right before you warp your fleet members because, of course, they will probably have moved since you last scanned. And I give my wing this warp.
Warp drive active.
So you all just got a warp. And it takes about 10 seconds on average from when I press warp to when everybody lands at the gate. It's good to give them an align to, but sometimes you don't know how long they're going to be sitting there, and with these tacks I didn't have that much leeway because he's only 200 kilometers out. But there's a town. I'll say except in fleet if you've. Oh, wait, is he from there?
Talos is blue.
Oh, fuck. Okay, never mind. Okay, so everybody decloak now. Just drop your cloak. So then you've got this nifty little situation of where everybody's off the gate. Now, I actually warped you to 30, which wasn't really what I needed to do, I guess, because I'll take this warp and get you off grid.
Active.
If you're warping 2 squads like that, opposite each other, then you actually have, I think the number is 39, if I remember correctly. Because if you warp them at 30, then the 2 squads bombs will blow each other up, and then it's a bad day. So if you're coming 2 squads from different directions, then you have to do it from I think 39 kilometers for that reason. But yeah, that was our quick little demonstrational. So now everybody please starburst out and cloak up. So what would happen if we had just bombed? Then I would have warped you to this tack or a Celestial or something. And I'd say everybody cloak up. And then we go through the process of putting Season Fleet and warping to me at 0 or 10 or whatever. And then Elves and Fleet and repeat the process. Yeah, so I hope that demonstrational was helpful in giving you a better picture of what's supposed to happen. Yep. Okay, so what I'm gonna do now is I'll give you all and warp back to station
Warp drive
and
active.
go home. And that's all I got, unless somebody has got more questions. Anybody? Cool. Well, if somebody thinks of something later and they want an answer,
Warp
then
drive active.
you can mail me Clay Robertson, just like it's spelled in Mumble, and I'll help you out in however I can. And that's all I got. Thanks for coming.